So I have something written down for you that you know, how you can carry home wisdom. It's always good to carry it home with you. So everybody gets one. And
Was this for me? Vielen Dank.
it's easier to keep things when you have written them down, not everything.
Yeah, this one's defective.
Defective, that's not good. Very good. So we want to start tonight by first of all remembering what we had done before. This is, I think now, we had 92 discourses like this. 92! Well, since 1965, so remember, this is the 93rd ecumenical and comparative discourse about important issues which we had in world religions and also in Christianity, and then we are in the Roman Catholic dimension, which is the third paradigm of Christianity, and particular issues which came up during the years. It's important that sometimes people, my students and so on, think that religion is just a matter of feeling. That is true, it's a matter of feeling, but it also has a cognitive side. Religions, people have thoughts, that's why they have religions. Our puppies cannot think, and therefore they don't have religion. So there is a cognitive and there's a normative side, and then there's an expressive side, expressive aspect, and that is most popular. So the singing, even Karl Marx took his children to the church, in Catholic Church in London, in order that they would listen to the music. So there is the liturgy, and there is then also the normative side, the ethical side, and then there's the cognitive side. And I think if we want to defend religion today in a secular society, then it is important to see that cognitive side as well. We usually started out with a reading of the Bible, and I want to do this. And I want to read particularly something which all three Abrahamic religions have in common. My friend here is a Muslim, and so we want to talk to all three Abrahamic religions, and he will speak for Islam here. So when you look at the Genesis, you will see that from the very beginning there is something very important said, which all three religions and the others should take into consideration. And I just want to read that, and we will start out every reading here with a reading, if it ever opens up. Okay, it says here in Genesis 26, God said, "Let us make man in our own image, in the likeness of ourselves, and let them be masters of the fish of the sea, the birds of heaven, the cattle, all the wild beasts, and all the reptiles that crawl upon the earth." God created man in the image of himself. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, saying to them, "Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and conquer it. Be masters of the fish of the sea, the birds of heaven, and all living animals on earth." So this is important for our whole discussion of the three Abrahamic religions. How can they treat each other in the way they do now in the Near East, and that is our theme here, when they know at the same time that the others, also the enemy, is created in God's image. That is our criterion for whatever judgment we may make. We want, in order to introduce ourselves, we would like to, where is this, show you a little trailer in which you can see where we are coming from. Is that it? Yeah.
That's the trailer.
Yeah. And then also we have published a book together which just came out. So then you see a little bit what our background is, and I let it just go around. You can get it there. And you can look at a little bit at the back, and so you can know where we are coming from. Okay, so we want to have a little discourse here, and the more discourse, the better. And we have two facilitators, and you have a little introduction to us. And maybe Dustin can say a little bit about himself and his own background. He is a famous author in his own right.
All right, so my name is Dustin. My Islamic name is Ismail Abdullah Muhammad, but that's totally incomprehensible for non-Arabic speakers. So
Yes.
I mean, Dustin's fine. Yeah, I'm a professor at Olivet College, where I teach religion philosophy in Arabic, and I've studied critical theory of religion with Rudy for the last, it's 20 years actually this year.
Yeah, let's celebrate.
Yeah, we have to celebrate. Yeah, it's 20 years. So I'm just finishing my PhD right now at Michigan State in the philosophy department, where I do philosophy of religion, which philosophers tend not to understand the language of religion, and religious people oftentimes don't bother with philosophy, which makes me a bit of a pariah up there. But nevertheless, that's what I do. Got 3 kids, and what else? We traveled to Rome this past May.
Yeah, and we traveled to Moscow too, and other places, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Now our Crimea is Russian, so
Yeah.
we have to figure out what we're going to do there. So Rudy has a conference in Yalta, in the Crimea, every fall, and so but now it's part of the Russian territory, so we have to figure out what's going on there before we go back. So
Yeah, we postponed it a little bit because of the trouble we still have. There's in eastern Ukraine, there are 3 republics which want to split off. And then there's even a movement to divide Ukraine up right through the middle, so that even the capital will be on the east side. So this is still going on, and I thought it was a little bit dangerous for all the scholars to move in there and fly in, particularly after this airplane was shut down on Malaysian Airlines. So, but we will continue next year, so we have prepared it already. And we will start next year with an article which I have written, which will be put under the Putin government, an article about the American world and the Slavic world and their possible cooperation. And the Russians accepted it joyfully. So, and we would make this as the basis. Then Ukraine was not annexed or whatever. Ukraine belonged to Russia before, and it was given as a present for the Ukraine, that the Ukraine would not have the bomb. So the Ukraine gave up the bomb, and they got the Crimea. And now they have 80% in the Crimea voted that they would like to be independent and to be the 13th state in the Russian Federation, and that's what they are now. And they are very happy under this condition. They have now free schooling, free universities, they have free health care, free hospitals, and so on. And so when this counter-revolution happened, the neoliberal counter-revolution in 1989, it was very painful for them. Masses of people in the society became impoverished, and then oligarchs, capitalistic oligarchs came up, and the social security system broke down, so all this will be re-established. So nevertheless, we will continue our work there. And we have another international course in Dubrovnik, that is in Croatia, and that is about 40 years old, and the other one is 13 years old. And so we traveled back and forth between the American and the Slavic world through all these years, and in order to see which one would have the bigger potential. These are the 2 worlds which have moved into the foreground in the 19th and 20th century. Hitler, whom you saw there, he made this great mistake that he declared war to both frontrunners, the Slavic world and the American world, and was crushed by both of them in the middle. So he was simply too late. That is when you don't have the right education. You can see what is immediate, but you cannot see any further. And so while he was timing very well in smaller things, he was completely out of time as far as the overall historical process is concerned. Do you have any questions about what you saw there? Because our history, of course, influences, Dustin's and mine, influences what we will say and how we see this religious issue there. So our theme will be no peace among the world nations, and particularly the Eastern nations, but it goes also, you have yesterday the tragic events in Canada, and so that was also probably jihad, and it may also be connected with ISIS, and Canada is such a wonderful, peaceful country. I have taught there very often, and so suddenly that breaks into things, and then we have it in the Near East, but we have it in Russia too, in Chechnya, and so we are in the same boat, the Slavic world and the European world too, of course, but also the American world. Putin has just put out a statement that if you live in Russia, live like the Russians do, and they will not allow any groups who would like to establish the Sharia law. And they think that the British and the French and we committed practically suicide by allowing these people to come in and to establish their own culture and civilization. So they obviously feel threatened by this as well as we do here. And it's very important then in this hostility situation that we see also look through the eyes of the others, look through the eyes of the Muslim Brotherhood, which reaches from Algeria to Turkey, and also the subgroups of the Brotherhood, Hamas in Gaza, and also Hezbollah, and then also ISIS, and what it's all about, what is behind all of this. We even know that in the American civilization we forget things very often and very fast, and there is something to be said for that. Some things should be forgotten, really. But then it can also be a hindrance when you have forgotten, when you are struck by something, you have forgotten what happened before you were struck. So when September 11th happened, and the other side said we wanted to give a taste to the Americans of what they have done to people before. And the head of the United States said in the UN a few weeks ago that there in this territory that was French and British colonialism for centuries, and this is the result where it comes from. So sometimes when we are struck, we don't know that it is revenge for something which we have done before. And then we can also not anticipate really that when we strike, then there will be a response to that. So in the class last week or 2 weeks ago, I said we bombed them last night, we killed 40 people, and so tomorrow somebody will lose his head. And right away on Monday, the head was cut off of a French journalist in Algeria. So you see, it goes all the Levant, it goes all around the Mediterranean, the North African coast, and along the Middle Eastern coast, and it doesn't matter where the head is falling, because in the meantime this whole front has been consolidated, so that they are all in interconnection with each other, and the heads can fall anywhere, from Iraq and from Syria to Algeria. So that is the front which we are confronted with, and if we cannot understand them adequately, then we will not find the adequate means to respond to them. It seems that the Canadians were hit yesterday because just a week ago they joined us in the air attacks on the Nation of Islam, or what is it called, Islamic Nation. And that seems to be a revenge act for that. We have to expect that something will happen here as well. So we can also say something from the Christian point of view, or from a religious point in general, namely the golden rule. The world religions have the golden rule in common. Treat other people as you would like to be treated. Do we want to be colonized? No. Do we want to have our oil stolen? No. Do we want to be assassinated from the air by automatic airplanes? No. So if you don't want that people do what you don't want to do, don't do it to them, or treat people as you would like to be treated. And very often we do things to people which we don't want that they would do to us. And the awful thing is that if we violate this golden rule, then of course the lex talionis, jus talionis, the law of retaliation, will be the automatic response. So if we treat other people as we don't want to be treated, then the law of revenge sets in. And there is no end to it, to this. Now in Christianity, and that means for all six Christian paradigms, Roman Catholicism, Protestantism, Orthodoxy, and the ecumenical paradigm now, in all paradigms, this law remains the golden rule. And so, therefore, it could be a basis for ethos, worldwide ethos on which one could operate and which generals could learn, businessmen could learn, and so on. And that would be the only way to break the talion. And in the fourth commandment, Jesus tried to do that. So the fourth commandment said, the old people said, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. I tell you, hold up the other cheek. If the Roman soldier officer asked you to carry his weapons for 1 mile, carry 2 miles, and so on. That means when we are hit and somebody takes our eye, leg, or whatever, then of course the natural response, the instinctual response, the chimpanzee response is hit him again, and so on. But this hitting again, of course, means that Mahatma Gandhi then said, if we take eye for eye, then the whole world will be blinded, and so on. So the outcome is catastrophic. And if you think back for a moment and reflect on it, then you will say, okay, it's natural that I hit back again. If a Jew whose parents have been killed in the concentration camps meets Eichmann on the street, everybody would understand that he would shoot Eichmann down on the street and so on. But if we step back a moment and reflect on it, and we would universalize this and make this a universal law, then of course it would be a worldwide catastrophe. And ethical norms which cannot be universalized are not ethical norms. When we say in the States here, I did what I thought was right, means absolutely nothing. Because Hitler did exactly what he thought was right. So what is right has to be universalized. You have to get a consensus. You have to get a consensus of the unlimited communication community, and without that there is no, the norms cannot hold. It's just arbitrary. Okay, so that as far as an introduction is concerned, and please ask the questions right away. And so, is there something about our background there which we maybe should explain a little bit before we go into it? So, because everybody has a perspective, and so we do have a perspective, and so if you would like to ask something about the movie, the little thing, you know what you saw there, then I'm happy to explain it.
Well, one question I have is the confusion over in the people who are Muslim, because it seems to me that, and there are some things I've read, that indeed this isn't a unified way of philosophy or unified religion, and there are differences. We see that in the different countries. We see it in Egypt. They're against one another. And we see it in some books. I read a book called Radical. Did you see that book? And the guy in there was pointing out, okay, he had become a radical, and after a while he said, you know, there's a difference. There's radical Muslims, and there's Muslims who are really religious Muslims. They're not the same people.
Right.
And I think that's the confusion we're seeing now, and what is going on, how these different factions, and who's supporting them, and all this kind of thing. That's what I hope to be able to get a better understanding.
It's a very complex issue that's going on right now. I mean, first we should say that, you know, Islam is divided between two major sects, right, which started off at the very close to the very beginning of the religion. Within a few years after the death of Muhammad, that one group wanted to become more democratic and they voted for their leadership, and the other one felt that somehow that Muhammad had already designated his cousin and son-in-law to be in the leadership. So those are the Shi'at Ali, or the party of Ali, and the Sunnis. Now ISIS is a Sunni thing. It's part of the majority denomination, the majority sect. But the issue there is that they don't really represent the vast majority of Muslims, because the vast majority of Muslims have already rejected what they're doing. They see it that not only are they radicals, they're well outside the bounds of Islam. They're still Muslims, but they're not good Muslims. You know, we should say that. There's something in the Islamic tradition called takfir, which is to pronounce a Muslim a non-Muslim, and it's hardly legitimate. It's only legitimate if that person themselves said, "Look, I'm no longer Muslim. I'm outside." You know, one can't simply say you disagree with me, you're no longer Muslim. So they are Muslims, but they don't represent the Islamic tradition in and of itself. Just recently, 126 top Islamic scholars from the highest authorities in the Muslim world, you know, if there could be a Vatican in the Islamic world, which there really isn't, but if there could be, these scholars have all written an open letter to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who's the leader of ISIS, and on 24 counts showed how he's completely wrong on all these things. It got no coverage whatsoever here.
No, we never hear about Muslims
Right.
criticizing Muslims.
No,
We
never.
don't hear it.
It makes it sound like
That's
the
why we are
Muslim
here.
world. Right. and it makes it, when you never hear that dissension, it makes it sound like Muslims are monolithic. You know,
Right.
when all you see is ISIS, and then you see the Canadian guy, you don't see all the Muslims that are fighting
Right.
against that are criticizing
Yeah.
it, that are trying to stop it, the ones that are calling the authorities in the mosque and saying, "We got a guy here who is, you know, saying things that, you know, make us really nervous," you know. None of that ever gets covered, and so it always appears as if, you know, it's this Islamic monolithic community, and they're all supporting this. Now, I can say that there are certainly legitimate critiques that the majority of the Muslim world would have of, say, of American foreign policy or Western foreign policy, or the advancement of globalization and capitalism, and the destruction of the family, which is new. I mean, we see how quickly families fall apart here in the West, you know, and now it's starting to come to the Muslim world, and they're very weary about that, and there's that pushback against that. But the vast majority pushback against that is philosophical arguments, they're religious arguments. They're not taking up weapons, you know what I mean? And it's only the small groups that are taking up weapons, and, you know, they do it in Iraq, you know, they do it in Afghanistan, where they find you know, people or the American soldiers or whatnot who have a secular flag on there. You know, they're not Christians or whatnot. And so, but there's a lot of confusion in the Muslim world about Christianity too. I mean, just think, Bin Laden, for some reason, always called all the Christians crusaders, and he still thought that even the Protestants were under the authority of the Pope. Imam Khomeini, the leader of the Iranian Revolution, who was a top-rate scholar, I mean, he really was. Over here, there's a really bad idea of who he is, but in terms of Islamic scholarship, the man was, you couldn't get much higher than him. Even he still thought that even Protestants were subject to the Pope, you know what I mean? And so they're just as in the West, how we have really no idea who these Muslims are over there and what they believe. It's the same type of thing over there. They have no idea, you know. So they see Christians, they think of the West as a Christian territory, not a secular place anymore, with secular polity and secular economics. They still see it in many ways as a Christian territory, and therefore those Christian armies are coming over here to destroy Islam. And that's the narrative that people like Abu Baghdadi try to put out there, because that's a narrative that gets people going. It motivates them to fight, you know what I mean? That somehow these crusaders are back. And yet we sit here in the West and we say, look, you know, I mean, I don't support that bombing, or maybe I don't support the overthrow of that country or whatnot, you know. I wasn't alive when it happened, but I didn't support the 1953 overthrow of a democracy in Iran, you know what I mean, which is what we did. We overthrew a democratically elected government, put in a dictator, and the dictator was one of the worst things that ever happened to the Iranians. They eventually had a revolution, threw them out. And if you look at the Middle East today, Iran is probably the most stable country in the Middle East, because it's the most independent. You know, it does not have those kind of ties, you know, like a lot of the Arab countries do with Western countries. And so, you know, the picture of what's going on is a highly complex one that really gets into the details of the Quran, of the Sunnah. Sunnah is the way the Prophet Muhammad lived. It's very similar to Christianity, the Imitatio Christi, right, or the Magisterium. How does one put this into praxis, right, put it into one's daily life? But all those things come into play when dealing with the Muslim world, and it unfortunately gets pushed down to, I would say, maybe a 4th or 5th grade level in our media. I was just watching Bill Maher, you know Bill Maher on HBO, and he was arguing with Ben Affleck. And you saw that? Yeah, and he was making him and Sam Harris, who's an atheist guy. I mean, he's a scholar, but he's just as fundamentalistic about atheism as this fundamentalistic, you know. And so, you know, they're arguing, making these sweeping arguments about, you know, the Muslims, it's all of them. They all believe that you should kill an apostate, you know what I mean? If they leave Islam, you have to kill them. And it's like, well, I've been Muslim for over 20 years, and I've never heard such things, you know what I mean? But that's what we think we know about Muslims, and then that's what's constantly reinforced and retold. And unfortunately, there's all kinds of, you know, details that somehow get lost. I mean, think about it this way, just with the issue of apostasy. You know, we have that too in the West. We have it in the United States. We have it in the Constitution. It's called treason. If you commit treason against the state, you can get the death penalty. Well, in the Muslim world, the state means next to nothing. It's the community. It's the religious community. So if you leave the religious community and then fight against it, you know what I mean, then there's grounds for treason. We have the same thing in the secular West, but it's about the state. There, it's about the religious community. So it puts a little bit different kind of understanding on it, you know what I mean? That unfortunately gets lost, I think, in the discourse, or the lack of discourse.
You know, the thing, just this one other thing I want to mention. Sorry that we asked you.
Well, no worries.
But so when I'm looking at the Jefferson Memorial
Mm-hmm.
in Washington, it's real clear the difference, because it says, "We welcome you. You can practice any religion you want in any way you want. But you cannot, no matter what, you can't go against the law of our government
Sure.
in our country."
Sure.
So, you know, in other words, that reigns over religious
Yeah.
freedom.
Yeah.
You can have religious freedom, but not if it's going to disobey the laws of the country.
Sure.
Whereas I have the feeling, I'm glad to have a chance to ask you, that doesn't exist then in a Muslim country, because the Muslim country is the government. So then they're saying, no, this is not just a government law, this is God's law.
Right.
And you have to do what God says. And then you got all these guys who are, I think we'd all agree here, are half nuts,
Mm-hmm.
and have no, you know, study or scholarly background whatsoever,
Right.
making laws for the country
Right.
with the authority
Right.
of that, and I think the country should that's the separation of church
Sure.
and state, and
Sure.
to me, that's just seems to be a big thing.
And there was a version of the separation of church and state for 1400 years in the Islamic world. It's slightly different. It's certainly not Jeffersonian. It doesn't come out of the bourgeois revolution where they took, you know, the religion out of this business of the state and put it into civil society. You know, that it's not that radical as that. But there's a verse in the Quran that says, "La ikraha fid din," which means there is no compulsion in religion. Now, a lot of these guys will read that and say, okay, that only means we can't forcibly convert people to Islam. So if you had someone by the sword and you said, look, you convert to Islam or you die, right? And they'll say, okay, so that's not kosher, we can't do that. These guys will do it. Yeah, I mean, as we see, ISIS will do it clearly. I mean, they go right up, you know, look, the Yazidis, you convert or we're going to wipe you out, you know what I mean? And that's one of the things that the 126 scholars wrote about. They said, look, you can't do that at all. Number one, Christians, Jews, Yazidis, Zoroastrians, all these different groups are Ahl Kitab, or people of the book. They're brothers and sisters in faith. Different in faith, but they're brothers and sisters in faith, and therefore they have a special relationship with the Muslims, and it's the Muslims' responsibility to take care of them, guide them, protect them, all the rest of the things, as long as they're living in Muslim territories. That's the first thing. The second thing is heteronomy, this whole idea of it's not only that you can't convert people of other faiths to your faith, you can't force your particular understanding of your shared religion on another person, another Muslim, right? So you can't force somehow Muslims to be better Muslims, right? Because all that is producing is heteronomic compliance. They're not actually becoming religious. What they're becoming is simply they're complying with force. And that's not a religious society. that's a society. I mean, a real religious society is predicated on freedom to be religious or not to be religious. And when you get groups like ISIS, what they're doing is somehow canceling people's becoming. Right? If we're always in the process of becoming, you have to have the opportunity to go through life, and we see it all the time. I've got teenagers, so as soon as those teenage years comes, like mom and dad don't know anything, religion is just garbage, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of people go through that and then eventually come back around to it. Well, that's all a process of becoming. I mean, Kierkegaard talks about that, this process. And they want to cancel that. Just cancel it outright and say, no, no, no. As long as you're outside of the house, you are compliant with these particular laws of religion. And that's what the scholars have come back and said. Even that is illegitimate. You cannot force people to become religious or to be religious. So certainly, every country, every state, every people has the prerogative or the right to determine what their laws are going to be. But even in the Islamic tradition, it has to be a consensus. There has to be discourse among the elected people, among the scholars who want to say, look, this is what the law, we would like the law to be, but it has to have some kind of democratic consensus in the sense that people have to say, yes, we are taking that law upon ourselves to subject ourselves to that law. Even if we're not doing it, I mean, what are you doing? You're essentially forcing people to submit to something that they don't see as legitimate. And that's a problem. So this discourse within the Muslim world is not settled about laws and things.
One more thing, and then I'll shut. But is the okay? So we know then. I don't know much, but I know that we hear that this ISIS. You say, well, how could they be so strong militarily and have guns and weapons and everything they need? And that's a good question.
Yeah.
Who is doing this?
Sure.
You're saying, okay, these guys. I mean, to be quite clear about it, are idiots. You know, they're not educated. They don't know what they're doing. They're murdering. You say, wow, you know, this is not like the intelligentsia of the Muslim society.
No, no.
And yet, you get this feeling of somebody up there with a lot of money, a lot of influence, a lot of governmental power in the Muslim world is backing these guys to the hilt.
Yeah, and it's
and
our
who
friends.
the heck is it?
It's our friends, the Saudis,
Saudis.
more than anyone else. And it's not necessarily the Saudi government. The Saudi government is afraid of ISIS because the ISIS sees the Saudi government as apostates. They're munafiqun, you know what I mean? They're hypocrites. They're kafirun. They're unbelievers, you know. And so they practice that takfir. You're not a Muslim anymore, so therefore I can attack you. And so the Saudi government is officially against ISIS, but there are a lot of people in Saudi that are really happy to see ISIS because it's militant Sunnism, Sunni Islam. It's fighting against predominantly the Shia or the Alawites. The Alawites are not the majority religion in Syria, they're a minority, but they're a break-off of the Shia. They're actually a small minority. They're a break-off of the Shia tradition. And so here these Sunnis, radical Sunnis, are fighting against these Shia, right? And so you have, on the one hand, Syria and Iraq almost becoming a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Because the Iranians want to back the Shia in Iraq, which are 60% of the country, and they want to back the Alawites in Syria because those are their allies there. And the Saudis, on the other hand, want to keep funding in many ways. A lot of the individuals want to keep funding them because they're fighting the Shia. And we've got all kinds of strange things going on there. The Turks, the Turks, I mean, they are not friends with the Kurds, nor are they friends with Syria, so they'd rather just watch these two fight it out. You know? And so,
as you guys know, Albert Schweitzer, the ethic of reverence for life. Where the heck is that?
Yeah.
In these guys?
Yeah, and you see a lot of it. There's, especially among more fundamentalist thinkers, there's this idea that of fate. There's already fate. You know what I mean? God's decided the whole thing, and that to kill this one person, well, I'm just an agent of history somehow. And so if I kill them, I didn't make that decision. God's responsible. You know, and that's a dangerous. Even if it's true, if God's omniscient, knows the future, therefore it's all predetermined. Even if it's true, you know what I mean? I think we should go about life thinking that maybe it's not. You know what I mean? Therefore, we bear responsibility for our own actions. But not these guys. That's not how they think at all.
So what should we do? Then I'll rest.
Yeah, it's really hard to tell. I mean, I do know one thing is that the bombs and the fighting isn't going to help. I'll put it this way, it's not going to end it. It will exasperate it. But at the same time, can we sit back and watch it, just simply happen either? There is literally no good answer for this other than this is a problem that the Muslims have to fix themselves. Because until Muslims fix it, it doesn't matter what the U.S. does, it doesn't matter what Canada does, it doesn't what the Europeans do, it just exacerbates the problem. I mean, this is a repercussion of the invasion of Iraq, you know what I mean? And, but then again, it's not that the Arabs are not capable of this or the Muslims aren't capable of it. There's so many different competing interests there. When the Egyptians overthrew Mubarak, they kept saying this is a great revolution. I wrote an article, published it, and said there was absolutely no revolution there whatsoever. Some of my friends were very upset with me. But I said you had no revolution whatsoever. I mean, you took maybe one step forward in a revolt, but you didn't change anything. You just moved Mubarak out, and you got another group in there. And so the whole class structure remained the same, you know what I mean? The whole economic system of exploitation remained the same. I mean, all that stuff remained the same. You just switched out the face, you know what I mean? And so, so even when they're attempting to fix these problems by themselves, in and of themselves, there's a lot of learning to do, a lot of learning. And the West, I love the West. I'm of the West. I can't get it out of me if I wanted to, you know what I mean? But it's not that we have to stop meddling. It's we have to, from the perspective of a lot of Muslims, we have to be better Americans, which means we actually have to stand up for life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, freedom, justice, democracy, not just some of the time, but all of the time, right? So it's not freedom and justice for the states we like, and the other ones we're perfectly happy with the dictators, you know what I mean? But it has to be that we side with the people who are for freedom and justice at all times. That's hard to do in this type of situation where it's so murky, to even know who those people are, So
I think there's a lot of support amongst community in the country, at least people that I talk to, which I don't talk to all the people in the country, of course. But I think there was support for what we could see were democratic elements within Egypt, for example. When they did originally have those demonstrations, peaceful demonstrations, I think there was a lot of hope that maybe something good was happening, could happen in Egypt. But of course it didn't. Didn't go there. I guess it became the army took over again, right?
Right.
And so
Yeah.
there was no real freedom or democratic values in place there. But I heard some of the people speaking during the revolutionary time. I heard press reports of when some of the people signed, some of the students and others, and they seem to want that. They seem to want, the ability to have free elections and a kind of democracy, their own kind of democracy, like at least a type of democracy, which I think is a high value, a democracy, because it means that all the citizens get a vote. Eventually, that slowly happened in the U.S. That, at first it was just white males with property,
Right.
and now it's almost everybody, although there's some hindrances.
Sure.
But still, we were hopeful that was going to happen in Egypt and other places. It just seems like that took a huge setback, and I know there's some democracy in Turkey, right? Do you see other countries in the Middle
I was
East
going to ask about it.
that have hopes?
Indonesia.
Is Indonesia a model, a good model?
It's a better model. It's not necessarily a good one, but it's a better model than what most of the Muslim world is. For instance, in Egypt, the most democratic group is the Ikhwan al-Muslimun, the Muslim Brotherhood. They were the ones that won the election overwhelmingly. But they want to, they are Islamist. And when we say that, we automatically associate it with terrorists. It's not what an Islamist is. An Islamist is someone who thinks that Islam has social relevance, right? That Sharia law is something that would be good to implement to a certain degree. Now, these are all loaded words in the West. When I say Sharia law, you immediately think, oh, they're going to start chopping hands off. No, that's not Sharia law. That's the hudud. The hudud is like this tiny little sliver of like the penal code. You know what I mean? Like if say if A and B happens, if someone gets raped, what kind of punishment can they have? That's the hudud. You know what I mean? A tiny little piece of Sharia law, which is much bigger. So. You know, like you can't. What happened in 2008 with the credit default swaps? You know what I mean? That brought down the whole economy and whatnot. That would be illegal under Sharia law. I mean, you can't do that. You're thievery. I mean, if you steal $1,000 from your neighbor, you go to jail for 15 years. But if you destroy the whole economy, global economy, you get bonuses, and the government gives you handouts and whatnot. I mean, that's Sharia law. Would be the end of that. So, but it's a loaded word. You know what I mean? So when you would hear someone like the Ikhwan al-Muslimun, who are very democratic, they're very moderate, and they say, we want to find a place for democracy and Sharia law in the West, it's already you hear, oh my God, they're terrorists. You know what I mean? They got in there democratically, one man, one vote, one time type thing, you know what I mean? And oh my God, we're really worried. And so we, the U.S., backed that overthrow of democracy, again in Egypt. And it wasn't the religious people that overthrew the Ikhwan, it was the intellectuals, among the intellectuals and the secular elites of Egypt, who are educated in the West, because they don't want that religious stuff, because the Ikhwan represents the middle class, it represents poor people, but it doesn't represent the rich, you know what I mean? And so the rich are the ones that are always backing the military coups. But you would never hear that here, you know what I mean? And if you go to Egypt and you do a little research or talk to Egyptians and whatnot, then you can hear it. But they'll never say that on Fox or CNN or whatnot, the majority of which we get our information from. So because the Ikhwan represented democracy, represented the middle class and the poor, represented some kind of law that would put the rich people in check, and so they couldn't rape the country blind. For that, they were overthrown and the military put back in. The military represents stability to the West, not democracy, stability. And that's what we're more concerned with, is stability, and not democracy. Because democracy is inherently unstable, especially when they democratically elect people that we don't like. You know what I mean? So like what happened with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. When they're democratically elected, the people overwhelmingly elected them, but we put them on the list of terrorist organizations and we officially don't like them. So I mean, are we for democracy or what? So.
One of the unique, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I started coming to Dr. Siebert's class a long time
Yes, you
ago.
have been very faithful.
Yeah, and he talked, about, he got to the basics about us being a global world. And yes, we have to know about all this that's going on with these people and the beliefs and so I have to keep working on that. So when my nephew came back from the Vietnam War, he started having foreigners going to be religious. And it changed him, he was brilliant, he's a brilliant man. He started a school, he started a church, he did a lot of different things. And then when the Persian Gulf War came, I hadn't heard anything about this religion. Islamism. What in the world is Islamism? I didn't even know anything about it. So I went to some adult education class, and the gentleman who was teaching the class was a retired professor from Western, and he was Jewish, and he had, there would be no repercussion on what he said, so he said anything he wanted to say. And he said he didn't feel that there was any solution to this. One, I don't even know what to call them, whether to call them tribes, sects, religions, what do you call these people? The one group don't feel the other people belong there.
Right.
He said, I don't see any solution to it.
Yeah.
And so I'm here still trying to figure out,
Yeah.
now we never religious war.
Yeah.
What
It And it's a big problem. I mean, and like I said, I think there's two things there. The Muslims have to reach into their own resources to find the answers to these problems. And I think the countries, especially in the West, more dominant countries, have to be able to help facilitate maybe these problems, finding answers to these problems, but not exasperate them. And unfortunately, that's what constantly happens, is exasperation. I like this very much. You know, I'm an ecumenical person by heart. You know, I really am, and I think that's it came out of my upbringing, which is the Calvinist upbringing, and then it found it again in the Islamic tradition. And after studying with Rudy here for 20 years, there's no doubt. I mean, my God, we went to Rome. I went to see the Pope. I mean, you know, and the whole thing. You know, we went to Mass in St. Peter's, and but I was with Sayyid Hassan al-Qazwini. He's the Imam of the largest mosque in North America, and it's over in Dearborn on Ford Road. So if you ever go by there, you might see it. It's huge. And I asked him about a question about Sunnis and Shia, and he said, no. And he's a Shia. I mean, he's a Shia, which is the minority sect. And he said, no, I don't want to be called a Shia anymore. I said, really? I said, do you want to be called a Sunni? He said, no, I don't want to be called a Sunni or a Shia. I said, what do you want to be called? He said, I want to be called a sushi. You know, and so he wanted to somehow find this geography by which the two could come together and say, look, okay, we recognize the difference, because that's what the Quran tells people to do. We recognize the difference. We may agree to disagree on it, but the differences are no reason for us to go to war or hate each other. I mean, that's what the Quran says. It says God made people and nations and tribes not so that they would hate each other, but so they would come to know each other. So our differences are reasons. They're invitations to discourse, not an invitation to hate the other. You know what I mean? And so I think when Muslims get back to the traditional understanding of Islam, it's very progressive, very progressive. You got to remember, it was only, in the early 19th century that women were given the right to vote in the U.S.? 1,400 years women have had the right to vote in Islamic tradition. 1,400 years. One of the first things that Prophet Muhammad did when he began his community was that he outlawed female infanticide, female infanticide, which was the killing of female babies, right? Because the whole idea is that you need that male to pass down the line, and then females, you know, they're just a burden. You have to raise them, and all of a sudden you give them away, and you put all that time and energy and resources in them just to give them away. And so the pre-Islamic Arabs would kill their daughters because they wanted that son. And that's now, by the way, happening again in India. But they do it before birth. You know, they find out it's a girl and they have an abortion, right? And so, but it's completely banned in the Islamic tradition that women have absolutely as much right to live as a man does. So, I mean, on and on, all these different things. Slavery, banned, done. You know what I mean? Racism, the whole idea that, you know, for instance, the last sermon of the Prophet was that no Arab is superior to a non-Arab, no white over a black. You know, all these very progressive ideas. And that's what drove the Islamic civilization to become really the pinnacle civilization while Europe was in the Dark Ages. You know what I mean? When it was just languishing there, doing nothing really. You know, the Muslim world were in hospitals and libraries, and they were doing surgeries, and I mean, unbelievable. But somehow that spirit of progressivity was lost, especially with colonization. It was just destroyed. And ever since then, the Muslims have adopted this reactionary type of attitude towards the world, you know, a defensive reactionary type attitude. They've lost that progressivity.
Was that the Ottoman Empire that you're talking about, or was that something else?
Well, the Ottomans were the last manifestation of it,
Okay.
and even them, they became quite, in the end times there, you know, they became quite brutal and whatnot, but when they were losing power.
Early on, they were
Yeah.
representative of what you're talking about.
Yeah, very
And we
much so.
visited Spain and
Mm-hmm.
Turkey and so forth, and so we know that there was a lot of freedom for different groups to
Right.
exist, you know,
Yep.
under the Ottoman Empire.
Yep. Yeah.
Those areas, you know, Jews were living there, other people
Absolutely.
were living there.
Yeah.
Europe,
Yep.
peace. You know, I don't know to what extent, but at least it was happening.
It was.
And they were pretty progressive compared to the rest of the world. Hundreds of
Yeah,
years ago.
and
But now, it seems like,
Right.
I haven't studied these issues nearly as much as you have, but yet it seems like very, very regressive now.
Yeah.
In else is wrong.
Right, right, and that's that reactionary type of
Yeah.
defensiveness.
Exactly.
And you see that with, fundamentalist Christians when people make criticism, say, of the Bible and say, look, we have to read this allegorically, and they go, no, it's like, come on, guys.
I've always felt that it was the fundamentalists versus the rest of us.
Yeah, right, right. There are
Frankly,
no fun in all
people
mental.
that believe that only their version of the truth is
Yeah.
possibly correct, and
Yeah.
no sharing or discourse with
Right.
all the rest of the people.
Yeah. And every now and then you'll still see a little bit of this progressivity. It was, I would think in 2008 when we were in Dubrovnik and we went to Mostar in Bosnia. And Mostar is a city that is still divided between Catholics on one side, then there's a road, and the Muslims are on the other side. And there's very little go-between. And my guide was a Muslim, and I said, well, I want to go to the other side too, to see the cathedral. I've seen all these mosques, let's go see the cathedral. He said, I just can't go over there. And I said, why? He's like, they don't know your name. He's like, but they can see. They can see what? I mean, to me, you look like everyone else, you know what I mean? He's like, they know I'm a Muslim, so I can't go over there. I said, okay, we were walking through the city and there was a new building going up, and I said, you have like 22 mosques in this city, you know what I mean? Well, what do you need another mosque for? And he said, that's not a mosque, that's a synagogue. I said, why? Well, it looks like a mosque. I mean, he's like, it looks like a mosque because the Muslims are building it because the Jews can't go over there either. And so they needed their own, place to be because they couldn't go to the Catholic side. And you had asked the question, you know what I mean, is there anything in, say, Christianity or Catholicism that would really stop Catholics from going into a discourse with Muslims and Christians? Of course not. Or Muslims and Jews, of course not. There isn't. In fact, there would be the opposite imperative to talk to these people. I mean, we're family, you know what I mean, in that sense. But something in that history, something in identity politics, you know what I mean, stops people from talking to other people. And it really has, violent consequences, unfortunately. And the Muslims are the ones that were originally 1,400 years ago supposed to break that. But again, the last few hundred years it hasn't happened. I mean, you have to remember, again, in the history of the church, a lot of Arian Christians who followed Bishop Arius in his homoousios formulation of the relationship of Jesus to the Father. He said that they're of like substance, not the same substance, right? That became heresy. But those Arian Christians thrived under the Muslim world, in the Muslim world. And they always said, better the turban of the Arab than the tiara of the Pope. And these are Christians, you know what I mean? It was because Muslims said, we've got no dog in that fight, so believe what you want. I mean, you're free, go ahead, do what you know. But that progressivity is few and far between. It's still, I think, there among traditional scholars, but they have lost authority in the Muslim world. And those who have authority are the charismatic leaders like Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and ISIS and whatnot. And unfortunately, that charisma is what draws people. It's like Hitler. It's what just draws people to them, despite the fact that the authority that they would have is highly suspect and questionable.
You mentioned that the majority of Muslims are good, and in our country they don't speak out. You said there's not coverage; they don't speak out. Can you relate that compared to like the mafia? If they do speak out?
Yeah.
Well,
Well, they're afraid of two things, I would say. So if you go down to the mosque just down here, and I belong to this community, there's two things that they won't do in the khutbah and the speeches on Friday. Is they won't criticize the U.S. government, and they won't criticize the Muslim community on any real matter. They'll criticize that people aren't coming to prayers, you know what I mean, if you're not fasting correctly, blah, 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 all these things that every Muslim knows, you know what I mean. But they won't criticize really on political, economic issues, not the government, U.S. government, and not other Muslims, for fear of both of those, of the U.S. government, who will think that they're a terrorist organization and start monitoring the mosques and things like that if they're critical of the government or something. And they're afraid of backlash among Muslims.
Backlash meaning what, like violent backlash?
Sure.
ISIS type backlash?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. You speak out against these guys, and you're going to be put on a list. That doesn't mean something's going to happen to you, but the 126 scholars that did that, I mean, they are brave to do that.
Yeah.
Because it only takes, just like we saw in Canada, one guy who's like, I disagree with this, and this guy's got to pay. And that's it. So they stay very quiet here, and it's unfortunate, but it's out of fear.
If they don't, if that fear exists in this country, would with all its faults,
Yes.
is probably one of the freer
Right, certainly.
and safest. Then what hope is there that if at least part of the solution to this problem, since we can't undo the history,
Mhm.
what hope is there that Islam will be able to reform itself?
Yeah, I almost have to sound J in here, you know, like I go back to Nietzsche, but, you know, the power is in the masses. And so the few voices that would speak out aren't gonna get too much traction. The scholars, you know, who are in the West don't get a whole lot of traction. I mean, I would be immediately, you know, well, you're an American, so of course you think that. You might be Muslim, but you're an American. You might have a PhD, but you're an American. You know what I mean?
Puppet of the West.
Right, exactly, and it doesn't matter what your qualifications are. So, I mean, for instance, the first Islamic university in the United States was founded in Hayward, California by Imam Hassan al-Qazwini, or not Hassan al-Qazwini, but Hamza Yusuf. And Hamza Yusuf is, I mean, a scholar of the highest levels, you know what I mean? But, and recognized as such throughout the Muslim world. But if you ask someone like ISIS, he's American. You know what I mean? The only Americans that are celebrated for people like that are the Americans that go there to help fight them, you know, fight with them or something. You know? And so it's not clerical authority, it's not the authority of the fuqaha, the jurists, the faqihs, the mutakalamun, the theologians, those guys, done. The traditional authorities are not, you know, they're just not there. They're not respected, they're not honored, and they're not seen really as an authority. It's the charismatic, that is.
No, not to, don't get me wrong here. I really appreciate what you're doing. But the word you would use, and people have used, I remember a thing Solomon Rushdie,
Mhm.
of the lack of speaking out. I don't, what do we call it when it's a lack of speaking out what we know is completely wrong? We call that cowardice.
Cowardice, oh sure.
And it was not the cowardice of that type that led to the United States being a free country
Sure.
over the British and everyone else. So, I mean, that's the thing. I don't know. I know a lot of people who are Muslim who are not cowards at all.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So I'm having a real trouble saying.
Sure, sure, and
I don't get it.
Right, yeah, and there's a lot of people who have a lot of conviction, you know what I mean, that will say something. But the question is whether or not that, does their voice hold weight? You know, does it really persuade? You know, if the Pope says something, he has authority, he has conviction, and you know that to a certain extent, that's what it is. You know what I mean? It's what the Pope says it is. If he's the vicar of Christ on earth, then you know what? His authority is something that one has to really, one really has to consider. It's not submission's not the right word, but it is in Arabic. But what's that? Right.
Respect.
Right, respect, absolutely. But in the Islamic, stay very quiet here, and it's unfortunate, but it's out of fear. You know.
If they don't, if that fear exists in this country with all its faults,
Yeah.
it's probably one of the freer
Right, certainly.
and safest. Then what hope is there that if at least part of the solution to this problem, since we can't undo the history,
Mhm.
what hope is there that Islam will be able to reform itself?
Yeah, I almost have to sound J in here, you know, like I go back to Nietzsche, but, you know, the power is in the masses. And so the few voices that would speak out aren't gonna get too much traction. The scholars, you know, who are in the West don't get a whole lot of traction. I mean, I would be immediately, you know, well, you're an American, so of course you think that. You might be Muslim, but you're an American. You might have a
Puppet of the
PhD,
West.
but you're an American. You know what I mean?
Puppet of the West.
Right, exactly, and it doesn't matter what your qualifications are. So, I mean, for instance, the first Islamic university in the United States was founded in Hayward, California by Imam Hassan al-Qazwini, or not Hassan al-Qazwini, but Hamza Yusuf. And Hamza Yusuf is, I mean, a scholar of the highest levels, you know what I mean? But, and recognized as such throughout the Muslim world. But if you ask someone like ISIS, he's American. You know what I mean? The only Americans that are celebrated for people like that are the Americans that go there to help fight them, fight with them or something, And so it's not clerical authority, it's not the authority of the fuqaha, the jurists, the faqihs, the mutakalamun, the theologians, those guys, done. The traditional authorities are not, they're just not there. They're not respected, they're not honored, and they're not seen really as an authority. It's the charismatic, that is.
No, don't get me wrong here. I really appreciate what you're doing. But the word you would use, and people have used, I remember a thing Solomon Rushdie
Mhm.
of the lack of speaking out. I don't, what do we call it when it's a lack of speaking out what we know is completely wrong? We call that cowardice.
Cowardice, oh sure.
And it was not the cowardice of that type that led to the United States being a free country
Sure.
over the British and everyone else.
Sure.
So, I mean, that's the thing I don't know. I know a lot of people who are Muslim who are not cowards at all.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So I'm having a real trouble saying.
Sure, and
I don't get it.
Right, and there's a lot of people who have a lot of conviction, that will say something. But the question is whether or not does their voice hold weight, does it really persuade? If the Pope says something, he has authority, he has conviction, and that to a certain extent, that's what it is. You know what I mean? It's what the Pope says it is. If he's the vicar of Christ on earth, then, you know what, his authority is something that one has to really, has to consider. I don't know, it's not submission is not the right word, but it is in Arabic. But what's that? Right.
Respect.
Right, respect, absolutely. But in the Islamic tradition, especially among Sunni scholars, they can issue fatwas. A fatwa is nothing but a religious decision. People think it's a death penalty. It's not, it's just a religious decision or a legal decision based on a religious law. But it's only binding if the individual takes it upon themselves to submit themselves to it. You know what I mean? So they're not binding. There is no hierarchy by which you can say, okay, like the bishop, he's subject to the archbishop, who's subject to the cardinals, who's subject to the pope or something. You just don't have that in Sunni Islam. It's democratic. They're the Protestants, per se. We're going to look at that. They're the Protestants, where they all get to democratize the text, and everyone gets to make up their mind what it means and whatnot. And that's a big problem, because then the scholars who do know something about it don't have the authority, because no one just, okay, that's your opinion. You know what I mean? Whereas the Shia, if you notice, the Shia are much more, I would say, intellectually curious and more reverent of authority, but they also have that hierarchy, right? The hierarchy of scholarship. So, and it happens to be that Khomeini was at the top. He was, during that time, he was the marji taqlid, or the source of emulation. So you subject yourself to that person, emulate him, and how he interprets things, that's the authoritative way of interpreting it. That's the authority. And so, again, that goes against, in terms of Americanness, it wounds our democratic soul to think, that we have to submit ourselves to these authorities. But it's a rational authority for the Shia. You know what I mean? It's not an irrational authority, it's a very rational authority. But not for the Sunnis. It's just not there, right? And so even when the 126 come out and say you're clearly violating, Islamic law, you're clearly violating Quranic injunctions and whatnot, people can simply say, well, that's good, you're a learned person, I respect that, but I'm gonna move on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm sitting here trying to, as a person who cares and would like to make a difference. I'm probably the only one in my family that ever attends things, because my young kids don't, nor do they even discuss anything. I go to a topic on whether the Jewish professor says, well, you can't do anything about it. Some of our politicians say you can't believe the leaders of those countries. They lie. I'm sitting here thinking, well, do we just let them continue killing themselves? It's totally confusing to me.
Yeah.
Is there an answer? Can I help? Can I make a difference?
if you ask a good believing Muslim, what can you do? Number one, and it sounds cliche, but it's like the same thing when I go to the monks there in 3 Rivers and talk to them. Prayer, first and foremost, prayer. That's what Muslims would say. But there is a hadith, which is a story about the Prophet, something he did. And it was a Muslim who went to the Prophet and said, you know, if something's wrong in this world, what do I do? And he said, first you try to stop it with your hands. It means some kind of action, praxis. He said, but if you can't do that for whatever reason, then you try to stop it with your words, just speaking out, talking to people, discourse. And if you can't do that for whatever reason, you have to hate it in your heart. The dysfunction, the fighting, the violence, not hate them, but you hate the problems in the heart. But that's the weakest form, he said, of trying to do something. So we have to definitely think about it, and I think that's one of the biggest problems, because we have basically mindlessness, or inability to think, you know what I mean, about these things. So we have to think, we have to try to do something about it, and that is, I think, almost taking on the Islamic perspective, that is, support your brother whether he's right or wrong, right? That's what the Muslims say, support your brother whether he's right or wrong. How do you support him if he's right? Well, if he's doing the right things, you help him do the right things. If he's wrong, you try to prevent him from doing wrong. That's how you help him, right? But how you do that on a practical level, that's difficult. I can relate that back to the story, both with that and what you're talking about with courage, to St. Francis. And when Francis went to Damietta in Egypt, I mean, he opposed the will of the Pope. I mean, we think of St. Francis, he's a very saintly person. I visited Assisi, I love the place, I'm going back there in May. But he opposed the will of the Pope. The Pope called for the crusade, you know what I mean, in Egypt, and he went down there to do the opposite. He went down there to try to stop it. Number one, that's courage in the face of your own community, which is something that Muslims, I think, are lacking right now. Secondly, it was courage in the face of the other, because he went to the Muslims. Now, they clearly have been fighting other Christians, and they could have saw him simply as just another one of the Christians who, as a representative of those people who've been slaughtering all these Muslims, and they could have attacked him and killed him immediately. He subjected himself to them, as he later will write in his rule. He wanted his people to be subject to the people they're with. He subjected himself to the Muslims, and they respected that. That he didn't come boastfully. He didn't come with arrogance. He came as a Christian, and he said he was a Christian, and this is what he believed, and he was honest about it. And he said, but I want to talk to the Sultan. Right? And they, for a week, worked together, talked, discoursed. Can you imagine something like that happening now? Someone saying, look, I disagree 100% with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, this ISIS guy, but I want to talk to him. I mean, I think if someone would do that, probably can't do it, but would do that, or would at least extend that invitation, if there's any one person in the world that would do that right now, I think it's Pope Francis.
Yeah.
He has so much respect from the Muslim world that, I mean, this again, something that never came up in the American press, is that when you go to Rome today, you see a lot of Muslims. They're everywhere in Rome. A lot from North Africa, asylum seekers and whatnot. It's a big problem, becoming more and more of a big problem. But the Pope has been very clear about this. He said these are people who are broken. These are people who are in need. These are the people who need our help. You know? And it's our job as Christians to help them, just as the Muslims helped us when we were in their part of the world. And of course, looking at what's going on with Christians in the Muslim world now, he tweets. I follow him on Twitter, by the way. So he tweets about that. But I think he has the courage to extend that. I don't know if it would go anywhere, but I think he can do it.
One more thing, just that's, but is that there, it seems to me that the reasoning intellectual atheists are starting to make fairly coherent arguments with very good points, and just saying, toss this religion thing out the door. And when you see some of the ramifications of it, I mean, are bad, so bad, that you say, maybe that's a good idea.
Yeah.
And then you look back and say, well,
But that's all means tossing out St. Francis.
You're
and
throwing
tossing out,
the
right,
baby out with the bathwater.
That's right.
But their arguments are, I'm hearing more of that, and that Sam Harris is one
Mhm.
good example of it.
Mhm.
And although I have to say the things I've read of is don't have a great deal of power to them.
No, I don't think so either.
Kind of like, what is this? So,
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, and
it does make you think that. Think,
Sure.
gee, we'd be better.
Yeah.
Better, wasn't that John Lennon's song with the, imagine?
Yeah, absolutely. He got that right out of the Communist Manifesto. I mean,
Yeah.
reads just right out of it,
So it's a really tough time.
Yeah, and that is a problem, I think, for religious people, is that we give them a lot of ammunition to say that this religion is just horrible, look what it's doing, you know what I mean? But that's not to say that secularity doesn't do that. I mean, God, Stalin was a secular guy, Hitler was a secular guy. I mean, secularity can be just as brutal, if not more, than religious people.
That's right.
And so it's not something with the secular, not something necessarily with the religious, it's something with us, you know what I mean, with human beings, you know what I mean? And that if we're secular, we'll find the resources within secularity to hate someone, you know what I mean? We'll find the resources within religion to hate someone. I was just reading, my son was reading a book by Anne Lamott, I don't know if you know, she's a novelist, and she said, you can, in this book, she was talking to a priest, and the priest said, you can safely assume that you've created a God in your image when you find out that he hates everyone that you do. You know what I mean? And it's like, wow, there it is. I mean, I think that's the state of a lot of religious communities today. And so we have, in some kind of way, going back to that Feuerbachian thesis, that we have projected ourselves onto a divine being, and now he somehow is out there, legitimates everything we say and do. But that's a complete creation of us in that sense, And so I think it's a big problem. I think it's a big problem both for Christians, it's a problem for Muslims definitely, and it's a problem for Jews too, especially the state of Israel.
Okay, if you all have a say, would you like to ask something?
I was going to ask from earlier, you were talking about that Islam has had such a progressive history, and then in recent history, less so. But we're also talking about how people are afraid to speak out. So do you feel like the majority of Muslim individuals have moved away from that progressive history, or is that still there in the community, but as a community, people are afraid to act on it?
A couple of things. I think in a lot of the traditional Muslim world, especially in the Arab world, it's still there among a lot of the scholars, the traditional scholars. Still have that progressivity because they're deeply in touch with the resources, the history, the Quran, the Hadith, the literature of Islam. ISIS is what Imam al-Ghazali, who was a very famous scholar in the Middle Ages, called riffraff religion. It's riffraff, you know what I mean, in the sense that they know a few slogans, and from knowing those slogans, they think they're scholars, you know what I mean, and really have no clear understanding. So within the Muslim world itself, I think there's a lot of progressivity. In the West, you'll find even more so because it's freer. There's no doubt about it. The West is, there are certain restraints, and I would say it's not certainly not absolute freedom, and there's a lot of things that a lot of reasons why we think we're free. Because we, like Rudy always says, we have 50 different kinds of toilet paper, so therefore we think we're free, you know what I mean? So we're subject to a lot of things that we simply don't notice anymore, that limits our freedom. But we are, I think, qualitatively more free in the West than we are in much of the Muslim world. And therefore, when Muslims become here, they're oftentimes some of the most progressive people. Like, who's the head of the Progressive Caucus in Congress? Keith Ellison from Minnesota. Keith Ellison's a Muslim, first Muslim congressman, you know what I mean? No one knows his name is Keith Ellison. But he's from Minnesota. He's the head of the Progressive Caucus. He's the one out there fighting to make sure that people can vote, and there's no restrictions on their voting, that women have equal pay, and all this stuff. And he finds his resources in the Islamic tradition, right? And he's very honest when he swore. You're like this. When he swore into Congress, he didn't swear in on the Bible, which tells you not to swear, by the way. Not only swear, like it tells you not to take any oaths, right? The rest, you say yes, yes, no. The rest is from the evil one, right? But the Quran doesn't say anything about swearing an oath. You can do it. So he swore an oath on Jefferson's Quran. Jefferson's Quran, right? Because Jefferson always had one in his library, and so he wanted to be intellectually honest, say I can't swear on a book that I don't have adherence to. I have to swear on the book I do have adherence to. And people freaked out about that. But that, I think, is a rather progressive way of thinking about things, trying to keep himself honest. And so, again, when Muslims get here, especially when they come into contact with, and I hate to toot the horn, but especially when they come into contact with progressive philosophy, and now all those Islamic values that were progressive can be articulated in secular terms through philosophy, you then see them at the leadership of the Muslim world in the West. But unfortunately, they still don't have quite authoritative voices in the Muslim world. Traditional Muslim world does not see Western scholars per se as being authoritative. So it's there, but it's a weak tradition right now. It's in a low point, I would say. So
The professor was talking about, I think earlier, preface, talking about we need to get beyond the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, and the golden rule and applying that. But I agree, but I think that I don't think we've ever had a nation state that was able to do that or even close to that. I think it's not going to happen with nation states. Maybe a person here or there can do it.
Right.
Maybe Gandhi was one of those people who really pulled it off to as large an extent as we've seen in a long time. But largely, that's not going to happen in a nation state.
Right.
Maybe what we need to do is just not do really highly stupid things. Like invade a country that wasn't even the one that sent the 9/11 people to us.
Sure.
If we could avoid those kind of errors. But I have to say, though, that if it comes time to do some bombing that prevents ISIS from slaughtering a bunch of people in a tribal area, I'd say yes. I'd say do that.
Right.
Even though it's not, in an ideal sense, not a good idea.
Right.
And there are costs. And
Sure. And you have, you have the just
it.
war theory, right? Which you can fall back on. It's already compromised. It's a compromise between the early Christians and even Jesus himself, with state power.
Right.
The just war theory is. The Islamic tradition is a little bit different. It's more, the just war theory is the norm in the Islamic tradition. It's been there from the very beginning. There's all kinds of, restrictions on what you can do in warfare and whatnot. So, yes, so for the Muslim, if you were wronged by someone, Islam would say, look, the best thing for you to do is to forgive them. That is absolutely the best thing to do, is to forgive, right? And hopefully they'll seek tawbah, repentance, metanoia in the Greek, right? The changing of the mind. Hopefully that's what they'll do if you forgive them, right? But if you cannot, or they're unwilling to seek any mind-changing thing, you're well within your right to retaliate, right? And that's the Islamic perspective.
Can I share with a lady that I know who's from Palestine, actually, and quite articulate. And I was trying to be sort of ameliorative about my Christian, it's sort of like Islam. And she said, no, David, she said, there is a difference. She said, you Christians, when a poisonous snake comes and bites you, you try to forgive the snake. In our religion, we kill that snake.
Right.
Does that sound fairly
I think it
coherent?
is. I think in many ways, Christianity is more radical than Islam, in many ways. And that's one of them. But radical meaning the roots, goes back to the roots, right? And I think that radical forgiveness, is something much more stronger and harder to do. You know what I mean? And so the Muslims also always say that, Islam takes human nature into account better than Christianity, because in Christianity you set the bar way too high. You know what I mean? And that might be the case.
That would be a good illustration.
Right, exactly.
I was kind of shocked by it.
Yeah, and most definitely. So.
Okay, so let's sum up our unbelievable wisdom. You see what beautiful students I have, and Dustin is one of the best ones. So we have a theme, Our theme is no peace among nations without peace among religions, and it goes on then. There can be no peace among religions without discourse, and that came up a lot, which we discussed here. And then there is no discourse among them without mutual knowledge of each other and interpretation. We saw there were some hopeless sounds about, what can we do? And in the American culture, we want to fix it, and this cannot be fixed. So therefore, thought has to enter the situation. Sometimes we have the students have in the 60s and so on, this activism, to act, we have to do something. And Marx had that in a great style. The philosophers have always interpreted history. Now we have to change it and so on. Now after that failed, I think it's time where we have to reflect on it again. We have to think on it. And without thought, I think there is no way out whatsoever. On the other hand, when the aporia, what's called an aporia, the discourse comes to a dead-end street, that may just be the beginning then, because we have to ask, so when people cannot stop fighting each other, what are we doing then? Well, we may go into psychoanalysis, or we may go into biology. Recently, a Darwinian fellow, very progressive Darwinian fellow, he studied the chimpanzees. Again, we only have 2% difference between us and them. Chimpanzees are much closer to us than the orangutans. And he said they are very violent. They make war. They go over in the camp and tear the other to pieces and go home and sing the national anthem. And they are like us. And somebody argued, but it will not explain Syria. It will not explain the war in Syria. That's right. There's 1.5 million years of evolution, but some of it is obviously still there. And therefore, to study biology is a very important thing, I think, in order to know ourselves. And what we discourse has to do something about knowing the other, but also knowing ourselves. We cannot take ourselves out of the picture. We are there. We own part of the oil industry and so on. So we cannot just go there. And history cannot be undone, but it is there anyway, and it has placed us there. We were colonialists there, so that cannot be wiped out. So we cannot just go home. We had presidents who wanted to just to go home, and it cannot be done. The Slavic world and the American world have moved into this leading position now, as I mentioned before, and there is no way to get out of this. The Greeks could not stop it, the Romans could not stop it. When your time comes, you go and you are the leaders, and then you go into the ditch. We are not ready to go into the ditch. So America is not finished. We have a tremendous potential, and so have the Slavs. And therefore, we have to take what is the case at this moment and do our duty. And so, but what to do, that's the question. And so, if we follow our theme there, then we have to start from the back in a certain way. We have to study those people, and we did that in your discourse. You mentioned a lot of things, by the way, a lot of things. And to sum up all these problems with all these different groups is one thing: modernity. That means only once modernity has happened, 400 years ago. Galileo Galilei and these people were produced by the church. You have to think that all the enlightened people were Catholics. It comes out of Catholicism. They were pious people. And suddenly, besides the pious people, they were educated ones. And these educated ones found the resistance of the church authority. And that drove them further and further. And finally, they were so damn educated that they could not believe anything anymore what the Pope said. Because if he was wrong about this moving here under our feet, how could he know something about anything else? And so a tremendous skepticism set in. Every real God struggle in the last 400 years of the churches were all lost. Lost against Galileo, lost against Darwin, lost against Marx, lost against Freud, and so on. If you lose so many battles, your credibility is almost zero. So when the Pope says something today, you have to think of these 400 years of continually being wrong. Not to think practically, to have a Lateran treaty with Mussolini, to have a concordat with Hitler, with Franco, with Salazar, and so on. All these things cannot simply be wiped out. We cannot just go away. We can convert, but even if we convert, the things which I had with our old bishop here discussion. He thought if you cannot forget, you cannot forgive. These are two things, two different things. You can forgive, but the history has happened now. But you can forgive, really, but it has happened, nevertheless. And what has happened, that works on its way. So we cannot jump out of history into the forest. Some of the students want to go in the forest, so it's not possible. So therefore, to learn what this morning I took, or yesterday, I took my class to the rabbi, and half of the class was 70 all Arabs from Saudi Arabia. So there we have a discourse. It's the only time that they will ever see a rabbi in their lives. And it was a beautiful discourse between them. And they learned something about him, and he learned something about them. That is the first thing, because if we don't know anything about each other, then we cannot talk. And when we cannot talk, we cannot stop fighting against each other. And if the religions are fighting against each other, then the nations will fight against each other too. But this is a thinking process before one gets there. And our immediate consciousness means, well, there are these nations, and they're fighting each other. And we throw up our hands, what can we do, and so on. So we, about, well, maybe 1.5 minutes, the rabbi was all wrong. The rabbi said 100,000 years ago, the man was, whatever came about, man happened. And that was wrong because he thinks it was 6,000 years ago. But he gave up on this already because he's conservative. It's between the Orthodox and the liberals. So it was 100,000 years. But it was really at least 1.5 million years ago. But about 200 years ago, we became self-conscious. We could suddenly see universals in the particular. Our chimpanzee brothers can only see particulars, but they cannot see any universal. They cannot see that there is an orangutan species and that they themselves are a chimpanzee species. The universal is not there. So that was something happened in our brain, that this came through thought. And if we cannot get to this, we will never start from the beginning, we'll just kill each other. So where there is no discourse, there will be war. Even in the family, if you cannot have a discourse, you will have a divorce. And you will have a divorce because when you sit on television and drink your beer, and she says, honey, we have to talk. And you think, we don't have to talk. That's the beginning of the end. And that is true for families, and that's true for nations. So that is our program, that's our theme, and we want to see how we can come to this mutual understanding and how that can possibly be done. We have a Sunni mosque just a few steps from here, and we have a Shiite mosque on West Main Street, right in my backyard. So, and I emphasize very much that we will go to both of them, and we will go, one class will go to one, the other class to the other, so that we treat them equally. So that, and then we have a sub-theme there. We wanted to talk also about the Pope's emphasis in all of this, namely Pope Francis, and then the Christian and the Jews and the Muslims in the Near East and at home. So that would be here, what we can do, 1 million unemployed. Is there something immediately what we can do? But we cannot even think about what we want to do before we don't have an analysis of what these people think, what reality is like, and what they think about what norms they have. The Sharia law is part of the norm system. Other things they have in common, namely the Decalogue, the chapter 20 in Exodus, and so that is a common attitude. The Sermon on the Mount goes a little bit too far, I would say, but we have to say this thing, you know, to hold up the other cheek. That was the reason why Malcolm X here from Lansing, why he converted to Islam. His father was a Christian minister and was murdered in Lansing, and his mother became insane, and she was in the insane asylum up here for 25 years. So it's all very close. We are sitting in the middle here of everything. So the situation is there, the context is there. You know, the question is only how to contact and to see what is around. But even that, these immediate things cannot be done without thought before, and to grasp what the religion of law, as we call that, what they have to offer, and what the religion of freedom, Christianity, can learn from them, or what the religion of sublimity, Judaism, can learn from them, and so on. So before this thought, this universal of this religion is not grasped really, then we get lost in particulars. The Europeans always emphasize universals. American always emphasize the particular. And our danger is that we get lost in the particular and in the singular and lose what may be the trend or what may be underlying the whole thing. So what is underlying the whole thing is that word modernity. They are all united, all the African coast and the Near East, by modernity. That means the first attack was on the first form of modernity. That's us. We cannot leave ourselves out. We have to see ourselves in the whole thing. We cannot simply they, and they are like a cancer, and we have to cut out the cancer, which is, by the way, fascist language. So they are not cancer. They are persons like we. They have this ability of thought. They have this ability to think universals. And they're not simply animals or microbes or whatever. So there's already a mistake to see that way. So we have to look through their eyes, and through their eyes we have to look at us. What do we look like from their point of view? When they say crusade, well, Bush used the name crusade. And they remember what happened 200 years of a Christian empire in Jerusalem, where all the holy knights came there and slaughtered Jews and Arabs and then went to the empty grave, which was supposed to be empty. It wasn't empty. But nevertheless, they went there and then established themselves there for 200 years. And what happened in all that time? And later on, when they were beaten there, they went to Eastern Europe here and conquered the whole territory there and slaughtered people on the way to Novgorod, to the Republic of Novgorod and so on. And then the Tsar, Alexander, slaughtered them and drove them back and so on. All this must be seen when we see today that we move again into the Russian territory, into the Slavic territory, into Romania and Bulgaria and Lithuania and so on. Napoleon did this before, and Hitler did this before, and the Crusaders did this before. We have to see who we are. There will be no way to know them if we cannot take ourselves serious in this whole picture. They are not without us. That means they are as they are because we are as we are and because we acted as we did. And we cannot say these were our grandparents or we have nothing to do with them or whatever. Well, things are more connected than people think. So, okay, so that is the issue there, what Pope can do in this whole thing there, or what his image of, and so on. So we have to see how serious he is about all that, what he has a great sympathy, has a great authority among the Muslim people. Why are they like him and why don't they like us? What's the difference between the man and us? First of all, historically, we had one pope from the Slavic world, and we had one pope from the American world. That means the church is right. The church took one pope from the forerunner from one side, and the other from the forerunner on the other side. So that was a much better decision than Hitler, who went backward and was regressive. It was very forward-looking when they chose these popes. But then the pope always, in taking a name, is of course setting up a program. So the name Francis is a program. Francis is not Ignatius of Loyola. Why did he not take Ignatius of Loyola, an officer who converted and produced the counterpart of the Calvinists inside of the Catholic Church? Why not that? Why a Jesuit in the papacy? The Jesuits are the secret guard of the papacy. They never had a pope. That means, like here in our country, the ruling class is never in the governing body. Rockefeller became vice president because the crisis was unbearable. The ruling class does not get into the government, only if it is very extreme. So the situation of the church is very extreme, and therefore a Jesuit suddenly appears, who always were in the background. They were sitting behind the throne, now they're sitting on the throne. So, but the program of St. Francis shows it all. That means it shows what we can expect from him, what he will do, to some extent at least, as far as possible. So, St. Francis was the son of a middle-class fellow. That means of what we call the bourgeoisie. The early bourgeoisie, early capitalism. So inside of the feudal system, capitalism arose in the cities and slowly became bigger and bigger. It had a hard time to make it. So when today there are setbacks for the working class or whatever, we should not think that this will stop there or whatever. The bourgeoisie was beaten back continually by the feudal lords until they broke through in the 1789 and finally marched to Paris and guillotined the ruling class and threw the clergy out, because the clergy is together with the ruling class all the time. And if a certain ruling class uses religion for its legitimation, when you want to decapitate the ruling class, you have to decapitate their religion. And therefore, we invented a new religion. Rousseau and Voltaire invented deism. And deism is our civil religion. And the civil religion is today threatened by the fundamentalists, which is very dangerous for us, because civil religion holds us together. That's the flag, and God bless America and all that. That's civil religion. And when fundamentalism breaks through, then it becomes particularized and antagonistic. So that's the danger. But Francis, he went to the marketplace and took his clothes off, and he was standing there nakedly. And the bishop had to run there and take his pluviale and put it around him. The pluviale is the raincoat of the senators. So the emperor had elevated the clergy into senatorial rank, and the pluviale, which the bishop still wears, is part of this, and the golden sandals or whatever, which the Rome period gave up in the meantime. So there are little symbols in all of this, where the church was bound up with the slaveholder system, was bound up with the feudal system, and now bound up with the capitalistic system, particularly the Slavic bishop, Slavic pope, paid with the money which he got, he paid solidarity movement, and thereby toppled the legitimate government there. So, but don't have to go. But the main thing is the protest, an unbelievable Christian protest. St. Francis is the greatest saint in terms of imitation of Christ. So, but there was a conflict from the very beginning that there was something wrong with capitalism, and something wrong with poverty. By that time, poverty was about 10,000 years old. And inside of Christianity, then the usury laws, of course, in Judaism and in Islam up to today, where the interest rate is cut or is annihilated completely, which would make capitalism impossible. So that we gave up in Catholicism, the usury law, we restricted it to 2.5%. So if you go over 2.5%, you have to confess it as a mortal sin. But even with the 2.5%, there's a question: if you have not worked for it and you get it anyway, which Jesus called tainted money, then where the hell is this coming from? Well, somebody worked for it and didn't get it, and you got it and you didn't work for it. That is the hellish thing on the bottom of all of it. And it goes like a cancer all over the place. So nevertheless, the radicality goes so far that St. Francis had then trouble with Innocent III about private property for the order. So the monks, individual monks, they were, of course, they had no property, but he didn't want to have property for the order even. And Innocent forced him to have property. He also forced him to get the tonsures there, this landing place of the Holy Spirit, so that he became a clergyman. He didn't want to be a clergyman. He didn't want to become a priest or whatever, because this priestly order that was connected with the feudal order, and that goes to the present Pope, who doesn't want people to be called Monsignor. There's Monsignor Martin down there, and I said, "You're not a Monsignor anymore." He said, "Yes, I'm a Monsignor." And I said, "The canon law," he's a canon lawyer, he annuls everybody. So he said, I'm still a Monsignor, because I said, "Well, what should I call you? Father?" I said, "Father is wrong too. Jesus taught, don't call anybody father, you have only one Father in heaven." Well, I said, "What should I call you now? Martin, Mr. Martin, or what?" By the way, he's a Jew. He's a Jew who converted to Protestantism, and then he didn't like it, and then he became a Catholic on top of it. So here he is now with all his wisdom. So nevertheless, that was the struggle with, and then so that, as far as St. Francis, to choose St. Francis means, of course, something now for the Pope, and therefore Wall Street is very sensitive. So if you talk about the poor, and you wash their feet, that's okay, and they give them a little milk powder in the slums, so that's all okay. but don't go any further. That means don't become St. Francis or so. That would be fatal. That means to attack the system which in itself is evil. And he said so, and money is evil, and so on. So the question will be how far he can go. He fired the bishop in Limburg. That's where I come from. That is where I fought fascism as a young fellow. And that is where the first insane people, where air was put into their veins and they were killed that way. And the Bishop of Limburg discovered it and protested. And I thought that they had stopped at that time. The government had stopped because of the bishop's protest, but they didn't stop. They killed another 120,000 people afterwards. So that happened in that diocese. And the Pope just maybe a year ago threw out the bishop there because he built a castle for himself, a palace, as if he was a feudal lord, except with a big swimming pool, which the feudal lords didn't. They didn't wash very often. So therefore the guy had to go, and he cannot come back anymore. That means we see what the direction is of the whole thing. But we had that outside of the church. You know, there was, of course, Münzer, Thomas Münzer, a priest in Wittenberg, who became the leader of the revolutionary movement against the feudal lords. And the church was not on his side. Even Martin Luther was not on his side. And he was, by Frundsberg, he was overthrown by the new army with new weapons and from Italy, and he was decapitated and was treated up to the end horribly, and the Protestant forgot him, and Catholic forgot him, and it was only Engels who finally wrote a book about him, and then in the 20th century we have another author who also wrote about him, so Bloch. And so there we see what is working in terms of repression of things, and we have to become aware of this. We have to become aware of the return of the repressed. Whatever we repress comes back in a certain way, suddenly overnight in the individual, but also collectively. You cannot do as a society and annihilate a whole race and enslave another race, and then enslave a large part of your own race, and then think that will not return again. Of course it will return again. Then suddenly you have this garrison or whatever, and then another place, and so on. So that means the best thing is to make what is unconscious conscious, and where it is, ego should be. That is the Freudian Enlightenment program. Unfortunately, we have repressed Freud, as we have repressed Marx. So those people whom we can need most, we repress. We repress Marx because he talks about economics all the time. Which country is more thinking about economics all the time than we do? And Freud, he talks about sex all the time. And what about the porno society? He talks about sex all the time. So that means, why do we always repress people who could help us most? So that is part of the thought process which we have to go through. It is not, we cannot simply in the immediacy face ISIS or this fellow Baghdadi there who, what is it called, what does he call himself?
The Caliph?
The Caliph, and the restoration of the Caliphate and so on, in this immediacy. We have to see that he is mediated and that we are mediated by a long history, and that all this cannot be repressed as if we were naked and had no history whatsoever. So the Catholic Church has a history, and so when they choose somebody as a name, that is unbelievably meaningful. So when you think of John the 23rd, he came from Venice. In Venice, the first John the 23rd came from there too. So nevertheless, the first thing what he did, he was to do the opposite of the first John the 23rd. He ran away from the council, and the new John the 23rd called in the council, the Second Vatican Council. So step by step they act, they don't forget their past. They are mediated by their past, and we all are, except that we repress it, and he does not repress it. That is an Enlightenment position. So then when the first John the 23rd, he was one of 3 popes, and they had deposed the council. So that means who acts in the church? At that time, the council acted in the church. But the Council of Constance, the same one who burned Hus, then deposed 2 of them, and this John the 23rd, he came to Constance, and he heard at night in the restaurant that they wanted to depose him too. So therefore he went on his horse again and ran away into the Black Forest. And the next day, the council came together and sent the police, and they caught him, and then they sentenced him to 5 years of hard labor in Venice. So that is the whole connection, including things like a committee about birth control. There was a doctor here from Kalamazoo was on this committee, a committee which decided that Catholics could use birth control under certain circumstances and so on. Well, it was Paul VI who repressed the whole thing and wrote the encyclical Humani Vitae and so on. And hopefully in the present synod, the preparation synod now and the other synod in January, which deals with family, will look at these things again and maybe make some, find some way, because there are ways out. First of all, there's a conscience, and all people have to live according to conscience. And Thomas Aquinas, who rescued Catholicism from Averroes, the great Muslim scholar, and wrote it down in his essay on the Contra Gentiles, against the Gentiles. That's not very friendly, because they were not Gentiles really. But the discourse there is still up to date, is somehow the greatest thing, how one can discourse with another religion. He lets Averroes talk, pages and pages. He makes his argument, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then Thomas makes his counter-arguments and so on. Without Thomas and Bonaventura and so on, Europe would have become Islamic. And Hitler would be very happy about this because of the 4th commandment. Hold up your other cheek. Therefore, he was in greater sympathy to the Muslims as Malcolm X, who didn't want to hold the other cheek. If you fight against the white men and the police and the dogs, it's not the right thing to hold up the other cheek. So there are connections all over the place. So nevertheless, we want to see what he can do or what he cannot do. So he went to the Near East. He did not take protection. He doesn't take protection in Rome now against assassination attempts or whatever. So that means one thing is, when you do that, holding up the other cheek, you must do it out of a perspective of power, really, of strength. It's not slave morality. Nietzsche knew that very well, the difference between those two. So it's a position of strength, and the one who is stronger has a greater chance to do it well. And the imams and the rabbis both think what you mentioned there. That means it's maybe okay in private life, but in terms of internal and external politics, you cannot do it, because the other one sees that as a sign of weakness, and then it becomes worse. He thinks you are weak, and then he will really attack and take the other eye too. And there is a realistic argument about this, which one has to take seriously. On the other hand, Jesus obviously intended the so-called Sermon on the Mount. We have to say so-called because there's higher criticism. The Luke Sermon on the Mount is not on the mount; it's on flat territory, and the other one is on a mountain. So, but it's probably a compilation of teachings which were done all over the place and were put together. But we cannot say that this was done now only for saints, or that this, like Protestants think here, that it is just a help to us how sinful we are. I think it was meant to be followed. The old people said, and now there's something new. However, I tell you. And the same thing for murder. The old people said you should not kill anybody, should not murder anybody, like Moses did. And I tell you, whoever calls somebody you terrorist, or calls somebody you communist, or whatever, has already murdered him in his heart. That means it's not traditional external actions, it's already the internal action. And whoever the old people said don't commit adultery, I tell you, whoever looks at a woman and desires her in the wrong way has already committed adultery in his heart. And then comes this thing about taking an oath. The old people said, don't swear a wrong oath. I tell you, say yes, yes, no, no. What is more than this is from the evil one, from Satan. And what does the American president do? He puts his hand on the Bible, which says it's satanic, and takes that oath every 4 years. And so does every courtroom in this country, and then they say we are a Christian country. I mean, if this is impractical, we should not continue it. A law which cannot be practiced by average people or so, this is not a norm. A norm is essentially to be practiced. And if not, we should be honest. Because otherwise we take Christianity as an ideology. And ideology is false consciousness. Ideology is a masking of national and racial and class interests. And it makes a mockery out of Christianity. So even when Jefferson says the people should read the Bible because we can govern them better, that is an instrumentalization of Christianity. And that means it's a sin against Christianity, it's blasphemy. So to clear these things up is necessary to take the big tree out of our eye, as Jesus would say, and in order to see what is going on in the eye of the other. So if we are willing to do self-criticism, then we can also criticize the other. But if we cannot criticize ourselves, we have no right whatsoever to criticize the other. So if you take, if they take a head off, that's such a horrible thing. But the people who were killed in that one bombardment, 40 people, all the heads were off. I don't know if you ever were in a bombardment. The heads and the arms, everything is all over the place. And that means it's just the other side of the revenge. So how can we criticize the other? We do not criticize ourselves at the same time. So all these things, and there are hundreds of others which came up as you discussed there. We can, look at least at some of them. But it's important that we don't forget the universal, and that is modernity. You mentioned your separation of church and state. Of course, that is an invention of the Great French Revolution. And before, already in England, there was a bourgeois revolution. That means the third estate. This country is controlled by the third estate. And to France, the third estate broke through, and so they did in England, in Puritan form, and so on. So that was something unbelievable, and we don't even know how shocking that is. Because one thing which came about was that we cannot know God. For 6,000 years, people could know God. Suddenly come these shopkeepers there, and they suddenly cannot know God anymore. And they are not even aware why they cannot know God anymore. Because they shifted to a level of consciousness on which it cannot be done, namely analytical understanding. The sciences must be agnostic, because their methodology cannot reach the theological level, or the philosophical level, or whatever. So therefore it's honest. And the chemist can say, I don't know anything about God. Of course, with this method there, you cannot know God, of course not. So therefore, the impact was, it has become a general prejudice around us that God cannot be known. And then when people say, they should change the Quran or whatever, the Catholics should change this, or this Pope should change this, what they forget about it is that these religious people think that the Quran is the book of God, of Allah. It's the word of Allah. And it is blasphemy when somebody says, I will change the law of Allah, or I will change the law of God. That goes even in those things which are so abhorrent. As Leviticus says, a man cannot lay with a man like with a woman. For a religious person, that means God has spoken. Now we may think that is stupid. We may think they should be contextual or whatever, but they aren't. So religious people think that there is a God, that this God can speak. Of course, he has no tongue, has no teeth, he has no organism, but he has spoken. And this there is Abraham. He talked to Abraham, and he talked to Moses, and this is written down. So there is a real revelation going on, and it would be blasphemy for any human being to change what God has ordered. So what we have to do is to take both sides seriously. Religious people are not only feeling people. Religious people can think, and they have an argumentation. And secular people also have an argumentation. And we have to see both sides, and the better argument should win. We have thousands of culture wars. Every day there's something going on with birth control, or homosexuality, or gay marriage, or whatever. There is not a week in which you don't have another controversy. Simply to say there is no antagonism is another form of repression. There is an antagonism. It's not as old as America. It is as old as America. It's 400 years old. And it does not happen in China, and it does not happen in Greece. In Greece, they had a little locomotive, but they didn't put it into the landscape because the guards were there all over the place. And the Chinese had gunpowder, but they didn't use it very much. They used it for New Year celebration. So it didn't take off, but it took off here. And we cannot think that, well, let's go to China, to India. whenever people, when the Roman Empire, when the West is in the crisis, then they go to the East. So they had in Alexandria, they had a big Buddhist school and big Hindu school and so on. It did not help them. There's no way that the romanticism of our students to go to India or China and think there's the solution is hopeless.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not.
Okay, so we want to show the movie too, right? Okay, no, it's too late. Okay, so let me sum up. What we did today was this wonderful discussion which we had, and we want to concentrate it on this theme which we just explicated a little bit. Okay? Thank you, all of you, and particularly Dustin, who was very helpful today.
Very good.
Well, the movie